Welcome into this edition of the Tim Crowley Show as we kick off this series of can't miss classics. We begin with 2008 ALCS Game 5, the Tampa Bay Rays against the Boston Red Sox. I'm your host, Tim Crowley, and I've always wanted to do a deep dive into this game in some sort of media platform. Now we get the chance to do it here. There's been so many great moments for the Red Sox in the 21st century, despite what may have gone on in the last few years in Boston. Having 4 championships in his 15-year span, obviously nobody else in baseball has done that, but it allows for games that were just so crazy like this one to sort of get lost in the weeds. And that's not okay, and we want to fix that today. So let's set the scene of what was going on in 2008 across Major League Baseball. Start with the Red Sox. They were the reigning World Series champions, had just swept the Colorado Rockies in the 2007 World Series, their second title in 4 years. That kicked off an absolute marathon for the 2008 season that the Red Sox had to go through. Opening the season in Japan, coming back, playing some exhibition games against the Dodgers, at the Los Angeles Coliseum, over 100,000 fans there, so just pure chaos from spring training to the Japan trip to going to LA, then having this long stretch to open the season. Obviously, a lot of deep baseball into October the year before. Guys start to sort of have the injury bug come up a little bit. David Ortiz missed a lot of time with the wrist injury. Josh Beckett, Mike Lowell each went through their own injury concerns as well, but there's a lot going well for the Red Sox as well. Kevin Youkilis ends up being an MVP finalist. Dustin Pedroia wins it in just his second full big league season, was the Rookie of the Year in 2007. He wins American League MVP in 2008. Obviously started an incredible career for him that it landed him in the Red Sox Hall of Fame in 2024. Red Sox team wins 95 games. They qualify for the playoffs once again, but they don't win the division. And usually when that was the case in the 2000s, it was looking up at the Yankees and getting ready for big clashes in the ALCS, like in 2003 and 2004. Well, 2008 was a little bit different. For the first time since their introduction to Major League Baseball as an expansion team, the Tampa Bay Rays won the American League East. It was also their first season without the Devil Rays, so there was a lot of talk that year of, they cut the Devil Rays off, and look what happens. Now they're in the postseason for the first time in their existence, and there's going to be playoff baseball in October at Tropicana Fields, one of the more polarizing ballparks in all of baseball for several reasons. This Rays team was so fun back then. They had quality starting pitching at the top, Scott Kazmir and James Shields. Maybe not the most dominant, dynamic pitchers of their generation, but certainly got the job done. They had great young talent in Evan Longoria, who's an absolute stud for them. Carlos Pena, who was right in the Red Sox backyard over at Northeastern for some time, had a brief stint with the Red Sox in 2006, I believe, and then making his mark. That Longoria-Pena duo, so good in that lineup. B.J. Upton starts to come into his own in center field. Carl Crawford can obviously steal bases with the best of them. He was a great offensive player. And the bullpen did its job throughout the course of the season as the Rays won 97 games to win the American League East, their first playoff appearance in team history as well as their first American League East title. They win 97 games that year. The Red Sox win 95. And so a 2-game difference. Where that starts to get interesting, the Rays won the season series over the Red Sox that year 10-8. So those 2 games that they won ultimately ended up being the difference in division champions. And these teams seemed to be on a collision course once October started, which was a really exciting time for this rivalry, given the fact that earlier in the regular season there was obviously the famous fight with James Shields and Coco Crisp throwing hands at Fenway Park, a full-on brawl. That set the tone for what was going to be a really fun October series. Both teams did their work in a couple of games in the American League Division Series. The Red Sox just continued to do what they did in the 2000s, with the exception of the year after, taking down the Los Angeles Angels, doing so in a fun fashion. They clinch in Game 4 at Fenway Park, a walk-off single from Jed Lowry. And on the other side, the Rays playing the Chicago White Sox. Evan Longoria went absolutely nuts in that series, getting things started at Tropicana Field. The Rays clinch and ultimately set up this series, which would also be big given they were the American League East champions, giving themselves home field in the 7-game best-of-7 ALCS against the Red Sox against the reigning champions. What a series that we got across 7 games. In the first game, Daisuke Matsuzaka was an 18-game winner that year. Had a very interesting year as well. The ERA can be kind of deceiving. It felt like there was traffic against Daisuke all the time that year. But he played Houdini all season long and got out of trouble quite a bit. Red Sox offense did enough. The Red Sox won Game 1. Game 2, we talked about Josh Beckett's injury concerns, was pitching through some pain in that October, just wasn't himself in Game 2. And that game could also, maybe not the same in-depth breakdown that we'll do here for Game 5, but that game was a massive game of its own. 9-8, the Rays win in extra innings. Tons of home runs back and forth. Both starters kind of got lit up in that one. 1-1, the series goes back to Fenway Park, and then the Rays, almost like the Yankees did in 2004 in Game 3, just played Pepper with the Green Monster and went absolutely berserk at the plate the next 2 games. They crushed John Lester, who's an amazing job for him in 2008, had the no-hitter that year as well. He gets tagged in Game 3. Tim Wakefield really got tagged in Game 4. Home runs across the park. The Red Sox offense really didn't do much. The Rays scored 22 runs over Games 3 and 4 to give themselves a commanding 3-1 lead entering Game 5. But this was no unfamiliar territory for the Red Sox. This was the era of the greatest Red Sox comebacks. Not too long after 2004, just 4 years later after the 3-0 comeback against the Yankees. Just a year removed from coming back against the Cleveland Indians, down 3-1 against them. They win 3 straight, come home, and end up clinching that one at home, sets up the World Series championship in 2007. Little different this time, did not have home field advantage, but they didn't in 2004 either, and that didn't seem to slow them down at all. Game 5 was a really big turning point for a lot of different reasons. It gave the Red Sox new life in this series. It gave a potential award to another Ray later in the series when Tampa Bay did win the series in 7 games. There's a lot to break down about Game 5, so it was worth a rewatch. I took some notes. Let's get into it. It's time for Game Notes. Now, I won't go through all of these. These are up on the screen for you to follow along, but this was literally just watching the 25-minute condensed game back and just kind of going through some of the biggest things that stood out to me in this game. First off, in this first inning, B.J. Upton goes deep, 2-run home run. He could not be stopped in this series. Was an absolute wrecking ball, just continuing to come up with big swing after big swing. He gives the lead to the Rays early. Like we talked about with Dice K, it just always felt like traffic was going to come back to bite him, and this was one of the games that it did. Red Sox had a lot of early chances against Scott Kazmir, left a bunch of guys on early. Mark Kotsay starts to make some plays, though, and we're going to talk more about Mark Kotsay because I think he had a really underrated performance in this game, both with the bat and also some really good defense at first base. Once again, B.J. Upton continues to hit later in the game. He just doesn't get out, and then the home runs start to come back a little bit. Carlos Pena gets Dice K again. Pena had a big couple of games at Fenway Park that series. Longoria starts to get in on the fun, another home run. That was funny if you watched the TBS broadcast, that it almost felt like as that ball landed over the Green Monster, John Farrell was already on the way out to the mound, the pitching coach at the time, and later a Red Sox manager, out to talk to Dice K. It was a fun watch for me going back and watching this game. Just because for me, 2008 was the first year that it was a full life and death season of covering, or not covering, obviously, and you're 7 years old, but watching and living with every pitch of every season across the baseball calendar. That was the first year that it was really start to finish for me following that, and it was a great time to start watching because and we'll get into this later. For me, this was a golden era of TBS baseball broadcast because it's really not the same anymore. The scorebooks are too small. It just doesn't have a big game feel. The announcers are fine. Brian Anderson does a great job, but it just doesn't have the same feel as it used to. This 2008 TBS scorebook was among my favorites ever as a certified scorebook connoisseur. And having Chip Carey on the call, obviously, people feel different ways, but I always enjoyed the calls of him growing up, especially throughout the course of this series. I thought this was one of the last great years for TBS at the peak of their broadcast powers, and it was a great time. When you think about the Red Sox in the 21st century and these great postseason runs, you obviously think about what David Ortiz was able to do. 2013 World Series MVP, the 2004 ALCS MVP, had some big hits in 2007 as well. It really wasn't the case for most of 2008. We talked about the wrist injury and kind of the impact that had. But starting the ALCS 1-for-17 was almost unheard of for what he did for his legacy in October. So that was interesting. This game continues to go on and ends up getting to 5-0, then 7-0. You can hear Chip Carey say, there's a lot of baseball left. But given how the Red Sox played in games 3 and 4, the Rays keep hitting 7 more runs, up to 29 runs in the first, give or take, 25 innings of baseball in the ALCS against the Red Sox. This game, again, just continues to be nuts. We talked with Jonathan Papelbon coming in the 7th inning as well, Terry Francona pulling out all the stops and kind of a desperation move. And the Rays at that point still score 2 runs that were inherited from Manny Del Carmen at that point. They're hitting the ball well. They're putting guys in motion on the bases. The Rays in this stretch kind of ran all over Jason Varitek for the better course of 2 years. I think it was in 2009. I believe it was Varitek catching. There was a series at the Trop in May of 2009. I think Carl Crawford had 6 stolen bases in that game. And you can kind of see the writing on the wall of what was going on at this point in the ALCS. Then the comeback starts. Finally for the Red Sox in the bottom of the 7th inning, 2 outs. Dustin Pedroia gets an RBI single. And then one of my favorite at-bats to watch still, for so many great David Ortiz ones, and this at-bat kind of culminates why this game is special and how important it is to signify how cool this game was and not let it get lost in the grander scheme of great Red Sox October baseball that has existed in the 21st century. Coming in against Grant Balfour, who was a total, I don't want to say menace or demon, but had that like crazy energy on the mound. And certainly, I don't know, maybe like the modern comparison in ways like a Liam Hendricks or something. Just coming at you with this fastball, wanted to be intimidating on the mound. And best on best with a fastball, it was 97 in on the hands. Ortiz got to it and walloped it to right field for a 3-run home run. Now it's 7-4. It's a great Chip Carey call of, if it's fair, it's way out of here. And it was an awesome call to set the moment. The Red Sox score 4 in the 7th, 3 more in the 8th to eventually tie it. J.D. Drew has a big home run. And for J.D. Drew, this was a really cool year. And we'll talk about it later on as well. His Red Sox career is a mixed bag, I think it's fair to say, but when you think about the collection of clutch hits he had in a pretty short time, it's important to remember the impacts that he made in a really important era of Red Sox baseball. He gets it down to a 1-run game. Marcotte, again, we talked about, doubles to left center field on a ball that B.J. Upton really took a weird route to in a time when he was supposed to be a really good defensive center fielder. And Coco Crisp, after a long at-bat, singles him home to tie, gets thrown out trying to go for second. This was a peak call of the broadcast for me, too. And look, there's a lot of broadcasters, and this is not from like a neutral sense of like rooting for one team or another, just like showing pure passion in the call. You hear as Crisp singles to right, and Kotze's coming around third. I believe the call was, Gross winds up, terrible throw, and which is just like laughable in the moment. Like it just kind of like always catches you off guard. And that's not the first time I've heard a Chip Carey call like that either. But it just it made for a funny moment as the Red Sox came all the way back to tie it. And again, we're down 2 outs in the 7th inning and made up all that ground with 7 runs over the next 2 innings to tie the game into the 9th. After 2 innings from Papelbon, here comes Justin Masterson, who I am not going to say is criminally underrated in the sense of, the numbers aren't going to wow anybody, but it's one of my favorite deliveries from a pitcher of this time and really ever. Kind of that cross arm coming at you, big extension from a tall guy as well. Gets a big double play ball for Carlos Pena to roll into. And there's another great call from Carey talking about Dustin Pedroia starting a 4-6-3 double play. He goes, he started the double play, he'll start the 9th. Really cool transition into that inning. Red Sox got a couple guys on. J.P. Howell, who was really tough on them as a lefty reliever, faces J.D. Drew after they worked around a couple guys. And Drew comes up with a big hit, singles this one to right field over the head of Gabe Gross, and it's from Chip Carey, line drive, right field, we're going to Tampa. So you can see all the notes that I took from this game, just some more random thoughts as well. But it was an awesome game to go back and watch. I never want this game to get lost the way it has, and hopefully this project gets to bring some light back to one of the wildest Red Sox games that you may not even remember. So those are the game notes. Let's talk to somebody who was there covering this one, as will be a staple of these series moving forward. Got the great chance to sit down with veteran Red Sox reporter Ian Browne, who has been there for a quarter century at this point, has covered all the big moments in these 4 Red Sox championship teams, along with some of the best games you might have forgotten about like this. Let's throw it over to our conversation with Ian right here on Can't Miss Classics on the Tim Crowley Show. Welcome back inside this deep breakdown of 2008 ALCS Game 5. We're now joined by a veteran member of the Red Sox beat, MLB.com reporter Ian Browne. Ian, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show and kind of run down memory lane on a playoff game that was pretty crazy for the Red Sox, but maybe gets forgotten in the run of 4 championships in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that if they had ended up winning that 2008 ALCS, that would be as remembered as some of these other ones, probably certainly more even than 07, just the way they were down in Game 5 and the way they kind of came back there. Yeah, I think a lot of things happened in 2008. It was a crazy year and just a kind of a roller coaster of emotions the whole way through. And the ALCS was kind of, symbolic of that.
What was covering that season like? Because although not a championship year following in Game 7, there was so much that went on that year between starting early in Japan. You have J.D. Drew winning the All-Star Game MVP, the Manny trade, Jason Bay comes in. They have the crazy game against Texas where there's like 36 runs. How crazy was that year to cover, and how much fun with so many storylines that really just spread from March all the way to mid-October?
Yeah, it kind of started off, I feel a little like the players in that it started off a little exhausting because none of us had ever started a season in Japan before. So I remember literally the last day of spring training in Fort Myers, I don't know if you remember, but Kurt Schilling and some of the players thought about protesting the Japan series because the coaches weren't getting full stipends like the players. So this exhibition game in Fort Myers was on national TV. So they decided to bring this attention to it then and sort of forced MLB and the Red Sox into giving these coaches their stipends. So we were like up to the last minute kind of wondering where the Red Sox going in Japan and this whole thing. So I remember literally running to the bus to get to the airport because that was the one time in my career covering the Red Sox for 25 years where we were part of the traveling party. They let us take the bus to the airport with them. They let us take their plane to Japan. And by the time we got there, it was just like that long flight to Japan. We stopped in Chicago on the way, and the flight was the airplane had two flights of stairs to it, and it was just kind of a surreal thing. And we finally got there. That the time zone is just completely backwards. You're just kind of in a daze. But those few days in Japan were fun, but kind of a blur. And then all of a sudden, it was when you get back from Japan. I remember we went back to LA. They actually went back to spring training after they played those 2 games in Japan and played like this 2 games at Dodger Stadium and then had a game at the Coliseum with over 100,000 fans. So that was kind of another spectacle. And then we went to Oakland for a second opening day after just playing the A's in Japan. So it was really kind of wild. And I remember when they got to Toronto for the final leg of that trip, David Ortiz was practically falling asleep in the dugout during batting practice. The guys were just exhausted. So they didn't have quite the same look they did in 07 to start, but I think they kind of got into a rhythm as the season went on. They had a lot of good veteran players. Mike Lowell was off to a great start that year. David Ortiz had a wrist injury in May, so that kind of screwed them up for a while. Ironically, JD Drew carried them while David Ortiz was out. So it's just always something was going on. Euclid and Manny got into a fight in the dugout one day in June. It was the same day that Coco Crisp punched out one of the Rays pitchers. I think it was James Shields. And it was just wild, man. It was just like there was always something going on. And then Manny popped Jack McCormick, the traveling secretary, a couple weeks later because he didn't give him enough tickets. And Manny was really like the theme there was once Manny found out the Red Sox weren't going to pick up weren't going to extend his contract and were just going to leave him hanging with that club option, he went ballistic and he basically shot his way out of town. So that's something that I remember very clearly from that season we just had a lot of drama involving Manny. Now, we always had a lot of drama involving Manny Ramirez, but it was never like this. He was never hitting teammates in the dugout. He was never decking travel secretaries. He was never going up as a pinch hitter on Sunday Night Baseball and looking at 3 straight Mariano Rivera pitches right down the middle, suggesting that maybe he wasn't even trying. So there was so much going on with Manny that was kind of a story in and of itself. Was just like, what the heck was going on with Manny?
So fast forward to October, they get the wild card again. Again, usually years in the 2000s, if Boston finished second, is usually looking up at the Yankees setting up for an October clash. How different was it watching the Rays kind of come out of nowhere for the first time in their existence, really putting it together with a lot of young talent? They beat the Red Sox in the regular season series as well and set up what was end up being a really fun ALCS, but a pretty emphatic one given what the Rays had been for so many years before that.
Yeah, I personally, I was having a hard time taking the Rays too seriously. It just felt like this team that was kind of coming out of nowhere, and they were going to be a nice regular season story. And in the playoffs, were they really, going to do anything? I just think that Red Sox team, Tim, they had a lot of swagger. And I think that they thought, even though they had come in second place, there were guys on that team who came in second place in 2003 and 2004 and made deep playoff runs, and they didn't think that was going to make a big difference. Back then, being the wild card versus being the division champ really wasn't that big a deal. And then the Red Sox go into to Anaheim for the ALDS, and they just do what they always did to Anaheim. They kick their butts. John Lester outdueled John Lackey in the first game, and the second game, JD Drew hit a big clutch home run off K-Rod. So they're up 2-0 even coming home, and they gave the Angels a game in Game 3 when Beckett actually Mike Napoli just hit some monster home runs off Josh Beckett. I remember, and Josh Beckett was kind of diminished. That's a story for another day, maybe. But he was pitching through an oblique injury, so he wasn't the Josh Beckett of 07. And then Game 4, the Sox won that on a crazy ninth inning rally. I think Jed Lowry had the walk-off hit, and then they're on to the ALCS. And to me, I think the Red Sox, like I said, they had swag, man. They thought that they were going back to the World Series. I mean, I remember Terry Francona, once they got Jason Bay, that team chemistry kind of got back to what it was in 07 and before. And once they got Jason Bay, he really solidified them. And I remember Terry Francona saying that was his favorite Red Sox team, and he thought that might have been his best Red Sox team by the time the playoffs hit. So I think they went into there against the Rays with a lot of confidence. And then so they go in to Tropicana Field, and they win Game 1 behind Dice K. I mean, this is the Dice K's year in Boston. He was 18-3, and I think they shut him out. I think they just had a really handy win over there in Game 1. And then Game 2, Beckett on the mound, again, dealing with this oblique injury. He's not himself. So he's going, I can't remember if it was Shields or who he's pitching against, but whoever's pitching for the Rays, he wasn't pitching well either. So Euclid and Pedroia were hitting bombs. The Rays were hitting bombs. This game was like going late. And finally they got to Mike Timlin late in the game. And then the Rays kind of won that game. But going back to Boston, the Red Sox are like, okay, we got the split out here we needed. We should have no problem, playing back at Fenway. The crowd's going to be electric. And I'll never forget the Rays hitters at Fenway Park in those 3 games, Tim. I mean, B.J. Upton turned into Willie Mays. It's like, name a player on their team, and he just turned into like the second coming. But B.J. Upton was the one who really stood out. This is the B.J. Upton everyone had always talked about was in there. This guy who could just be a great player someday because he had the natural. And he was taking target practice at the Green Monster. And I remember John Lester, who was the Red Sox best pitcher that year, he just kind of took a beating in Game 3. So now they lose Game 3. And so there's, a little dent in the armor. And then Game 4, I think Wakefield was pitching Game 4. And again, the Rays are just kind of teeing off on the Sox. These 2 games were one-sided. The Red Sox were never in either of these games. So
what kind of weighs like that part going into Game 5? Because there is, confidence of still playing at home, but also knowing how much of a pounding, like you mentioned, the pitching staff have taken the last few days. Obviously, in this era, comebacks in the ALCS were not uncommon, given that they were just a year removed from 3-1 against Cleveland. They were literally in this position a year before. 04, not too long ago. Like, what do you remember the vibe going into the park for Game 5 like? And then obviously taking another quick turn when Upton homers again. And we have plenty of other B.J. Upton talking in a minute, but like immediately, kicks off for the Rays again in Game 5.
Yeah. So what was interesting in both 2007 and 2008, and I think this helped the Red Sox in both years, was that for some quirky reason, MLB's playoff schedule, they had the standard travel day between Game 2 and Game 3 where there'd be no game, but then they would have another off day, just a random off day between Game 4 and Game 5. So I think they were trying to sort of maximize, the TV ratings or something. So the Red Sox had a day after getting beaten around in Game 3 and Game 4. They had a day to sort of decompress and take stock and reset, kind of like they did in 07. I remember just kind of listening to Jason Varitek talk that day. And I was like, this guy's confident. I'm like, this guy's been here before. He was just like one pitch at a time, one inning at a time, the same things we did in 04. I mean, Jason Varitek, he goes back to 1999 with these comebacks, right? Coming back from 2-0 against Cleveland in 99, coming back from 2-0 against Oakland in 03, 04. We all know what happened in 04, 07. So he's been a part of 4 of these things now. Varitek has. And he just listening to him, you're like, okay, the Red Sox think they can do this. They're not scared. I think the day off did them a world of good here. And then you have Dice K pitching in Game 5, and he's coming off that pretty good game in Game 1. He had won Game 7 of the ALCS the year before and Game 3 of the World Series. So he's shown he can pitch in pressurized spots. But what happened was the Rays were just in such a groove, and it carried into game 5. And I don't think it mattered if Daisuke was pitching or Bob Gibson was pitching or whoever was pitching. The Rays were just feeling themselves and feeling Fenway Park, and almost they were the ones who looked like they had played 81 home games at Fenway Park. And then, that game stayed a little close for a while. And then as a last gasp, Terry Francona brought in Jonathan Papelbon in the 7th inning of game 5, which he also did with Keith Folk in 2004, game 4, when they were just sort of on the brink here trying to hang in it. And Papelbon gave up a 2-run homer. Was it Upton? I think it was Upton that made it.
It was Upton again, scraped the wall. It was weird because I was watching the rest of the series the other day, and it was funny. When you came in to close game 6, they had a leaderboard of most scoreless innings, and it's all right, this is kind of I know there's inherited runs to Manuel Carmen, but this is weird to show a day after he gave up 2, but then obviously kept it at 7-0 at the time.
Yeah. So before 7-0, you're like, okay, maybe a slight chance they put something together, but 7-0. I don't know if there's anybody in the ballpark, even the Red Sox, who thought, at that point, you're just trying to save face. You're trying to make it respectable. I mean, you don't come back from 7-0 in the bottom of the 7th inning of an elimination playoff game. And not only that, Tim, it's 2 outs in the 7th inning. Dustin Pedroia did get a key hit there to get the first run in. It was an RBI single, I think, to right field. And then up steps the one guy Joe Madden doesn't want to see it come to the plate, right? David Ortiz, who isn't the same player. People forget he is not the same player in 2008. He has this wrist injury at the end of May. He comes back in August. He shows flashes of being David Ortiz, but he's still not. The real David Ortiz actually didn't come back until 2010, really. It took him a while to come back from this wrist injury. But somehow this one at bat, he locks in against Grant Balfour, and he hits a 3-run homer. And right now you're still down 7-4, so it's not like the grand slam and that he's going to hit 5 years later against Joaquin Benoit that ties the game. You're still down 3 runs, but David Ortiz once again created life for the Red Sox. He brought spark back into the ballpark, and you once again had a chance. I mean, 3 runs is a lot different than 7 runs. I mean, that's 2 bloops and a blast, and you're right back in this thing. So I think that was one of the more underrated homers of David Ortiz's career. That's the one you sometimes see on the highlight reel of, here's this guy coming through. Because without that, they got no shot. The series is over in 5 games. So they get through the 7th, down 7-4. And the 8th, another big inning in the 8th, J.D. Drew, who I keep saying J.D. Drew. And people sometimes, look back at his Red Sox career and were kind of underwhelmed. 2008 was the one year that J.D. Drew really earned every bit of his money. He was the All-Star Game MVP. When Ortiz got hurt in May, Francona made J.D. Drew his number 3 hitter. J.D. Drew had his hottest couple months, really, with the Red Sox. He stayed healthy that year. He had clutch hits throughout October. And J.D. Drew hit a 2-run homer there in the 8th inning to make it 7-6. And then the big at-bat of that game, I think, Coco Crisp comes up, and he just works an incredible at-bat, fouling off pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch. And a lot of his time didn't go great in Boston either. He was there 3 years, but this was really his high point of the Red Sox, was how he was playing late in the 2008 season. And he worked this great at bat, and he belts a single to right field on, I believe it was a 3-2 pitch. And this game's tied, Tim. This game now this game is tied up. So now you think Coco does get thrown out at second base, stretching on the throw home to end the inning. But now you think the Red Sox are winning this game, because once you tie this type of game down 7-0 at home, you have last ups. You start to feel invincible. And they got through the 9th unscathed. The Rays didn't score in the 9th, and then the bottom of the 9th, the Red Sox first 2 guys, they both make outs. And then the next 2 guys get on. I think it was Euclid and you have to help me out here. I can't remember who the other one was. But I think
it was a Bay. Was it Bay after him?
Might have been Bay, yeah. I think Euclid and Bay both get on. So here we are, 1st and 3rd, I think now, with 2 outs in the 9th, and upsets J.D. Drew. Well, I'm just saying, this guy is all of a sudden he's Mr. Clutch. This is the guy you signed for 5 years at what was it, $70 million or 90, whatever it was at the time. It seemed like huge money for J.D. Drew. And J.D. Drew gets locked in, and he rips a single to right, and in comes the winning run, and they're just going crazy at Fenway. It's like they had won the World Series, and it's like they didn't need the plane to go to Tampa. They were flying there. Like they were flying on their own. They were flying naturally. It's like we just pulled out a comeback that was kind of like a culmination of all the comebacks we pulled out in 07 and 04, but in one game, coming back from 7-0, which they hadn't done in any of these other playoff games. I mean, it was wild. So you're just thinking at this time, right? Because I've mentioned a few times that Beckett was not himself. He was diminished in this postseason. So I'm just thinking if Beckett can find a way to get them to Game 7, they're going to win Game 7. Because you have John Lester in Game 7. You have Garza for the Rays, who's not known as like a big game. He's not at Lester's level at that point of their careers in 2008. Beckett kind of just, he's on massive painkillers, he would tell us later. Just kind of drugged out, but getting the job done and at least keeping the team in the game. That was maybe his, people think about all the dominance he had in 07 and everything. This was maybe his gutsiest performance with the Red Sox because he was doing it on blood and guts alone. He had no business really pitching out there with oblique. I mean, oblique injuries, you know how they are. There's usually a minimum of a 3-week injury, and he came back, I think it was in about a week he was pitching again. So that shows you the guts of that guy and what he did to keep this a game. And then Jason Varitek, who was just having his worst season offensively, and where it's just like he kind of lost it overnight as a hitter. He hits the big home run to put them up. I think it was the 7th or 8th inning. He hits the go-ahead home run. So they end up winning this game barely. You know, Papelbon comes on and does what he does, gets the save. And then it's like, wow, Beckett did it with guts. Varitek comes up with really his biggest hit maybe all season. And it's like, here we go again. Game 7, Red Sox Rays. It's like, who do you like? Like, who do you think the country's liking here? John Lester. The thing I remember the most is all the games in my life covering this team, going to the park. The game I was most sure they were going to win was this game. Really, I'm dead serious. I thought there was no way the Red Sox were going to lose Game 7 after what they did in Game 5, after what they did just getting through this Beckett start in Game 6, and just to get to Game 7, it's going to be a great World Series against the Phillies. Short flights. I'm thinking about the whole thing. This is going to be fun. You're going to have Ryan Howard and Big Papi and, John Lester and Cole Hamels and all the, Cliff Lee and all this stuff was going to happen. It was just going to be, a great series. And then nothing changed my mind when Dustin Pedroia homered in the first inning. I mean, at this point, he was just, he would always do what the occasion called for. But then after that, something happened that we didn't expect. And that was that Garza was just nails. They couldn't hit him. Now, you got to remember this Red Sox lineup was missing a key cog in Mike Lowell, who came out the series before, I think, with his hip just went out on him. So at this point, they're playing with Mark Kotze at first base. I still, for the life of me, don't know why they didn't use Sean Casey at first base. I think he would have been a better offensive player. And they had Uke over at third, which was no problem. That was the beauty of Uke, was he could do anything. But shortstop, you kind of had, you had Jed Lowry and Alex Cora actually were kind of splitting shortstop at this time. So there were some spots in the lineup they weren't getting a lot of production from. So it wasn't totally unheard of for Garza to shut them down, but you still think as the game going, somebody's going to do something here. Somebody's going to do something. And Lester gave up one big hit there to make it, they were down 3-1. And then they bring this kid out of the bullpen, David Price out of Vanderbilt, this kid who I think had just been drafted earlier that year. And you're like, what's he going to do? And he comes out and he just looked like he didn't have this was not the David Price who clammed up in postseasons and years to come. This was a guy who didn't even know where he was. He was just like, what do I have to lose? I'm a September call. I'm just firing the ball here. And the Red Sox did have a rally. And there was one really controversial play where J.D. Drew struck out on a check swing. And he swears to this day that he did not, that he held up his swing. And J.D. Drew is not a guy to be demonstrative. He's not a guy to argue with the umpire. He's not a guy to show any emotion. So the fact J.D. Drew showed emotion on this kind of showed me something. So that maybe the Red Sox got jobbed by a bad call. It happens. We don't have the challenges that we have now. This was baseball in 2008. So that was really kind of their last gasp. and then Price comes on and gets gets a ground ball up the middle, and Lowry gets forced at second base there, and game over, series over. The Rays are going to the World Series, and you're just like, oh my God, how did this happen? So yeah, really stunned. I still am stunned they didn't win that game. I don't know how they would have done against the Phillies. The Phillies, they didn't have the health problems the Red Sox had. The Red Sox had the issue with Beckett. They had the issue with not having Mike Lowell. They had the issue with Varitek, kind of not the same guy he was offensively. Not a lot of production at first, not a lot of production at short. So I'm not sure what would have happened in the World Series, but I think it would have been a fun World Series. It would have been a much more captivating World Series with these two big markets than Rays, Phillies, which, what do you remember about that World Series? That one of the games was called by rain and they had to continue it the next day. I mean, that's basically the lasting memory of that World Series. I think this one you would have had some memory. So I think it's too bad the Red Sox didn't have a chance to go for back-to-back. That's something the Red Sox haven't done since 1915 and 16. That's something no team had done from 2000 until this past season when LA finally did it. So I would have loved to have covered the team that did that. That would have been a cool thing to see, especially because like Terry Francona still looks back so fondly on that 08 team. I think he loved the team because he got rid of the Manny drama, so he didn't have all the kind of extracurriculars and outside distract. He just had a bunch of grinders that just wanted to come every day. Led by the way, by Dustin Pedroia, who was the unquestioned leader of the 2008 Red Sox. Even while Big Papi was still around, he was a little physically diminished that year. Pedroia was the leader of that team. Everyone took his cue. Euclid was a monster. Euclid was at the height of his powers in 2008. Finished, I think, third to Pedroia. I think it went Pedroia, Joe Mauer, and Euclid in the MVP race that year. So the Red Sox had two of the three MVP finishers. So this was really a team that bonded together. Jason Bay fit in perfectly, and they thought they could be special. So they just came up short. But boy, it made it a lot of fun to not see them go down in 5 games like they could have. I think, I don't regret the fact that they came back and won this wild Game 5, then won Game 6 to give us the spectacle that was Game 7, which was a great game. You love covering any Game 7. They're always exciting to cover. So I don't think anyone regrets that they made the comeback in Game 5 just to go on to lose. They still made it exciting. I think Theo said something of the day after press conference, like that comeback, that'll keep us a little warm kind of during the winter. When we think back to that, it'll give us something to sort of look back on. So it was, still, you can isolate that game. You can still look back at that game and just remember it as a great moment of your career that you covered something that was semi-historic. I remember sports writers, Tim, were canceling flights and rental cars to Tampa because they were sure we weren't going back there once Upton hit that home run and it was 7-0. And then they're scrambling again after the game, rebooking reservations. And it was just kind of a wild thing. And it was, kind of gets lost in the shuffle between 04, 07, 13, 18, all that stuff. But 08, that was a pretty wild ride too. And that was a damn good Red Sox team.
I'm glad you touched on that part because, again, it is hard to have this stand out in a stretch where you do have 4 championships in 15 years or so. But it is funny how many stories come out of this game. Like you talked about with the writers. I know, the year later, Dustin Pedroia included in his book that his wife Kelly was purchasing, instead of what the writers were doing, canceling flights to Tampa, she was booking flights back to Arizona for the offseason. I know Dustin said he found out after the game, was kind of joking, like, really? You didn't believe in us? Like, what's going on? But it's funny how much stuff comes out of this game. You have that. One thing that I think connects them, because even years later, they still have some crazy games against the Rays. I forget if it was Game 3 or Game 4 in 21, but Wander Franco kind of has that play in the hole, throws it away, allows the Red Sox to walk off in the 9th, the same way that I think it was Longoria in Game 5 had an errant throw that put a runner in scoring position against Howell, and that coming to fruition. With so much going on in that game, knowing that, I remember there was a great story about this after Super Bowl 51, and they sat down with a lot of writers and said, how many times did you have to change your story, or how many headlines did you go with during the course of the game? How many times do you think you changed your story, from like the 6th, 7th inning on?
Oh, in Game 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 2, 3, 4. I mean, who's counting? It was just like, you basically have one story if they pull off the comeback, one story if the comeback falls short. So you're sort of working multiple screens at the same time. But yeah, that was just like those games in 04. The ALCS of 04. It was crazy. There was no room to breathe there. And you needed to, if the Red Sox were going to walk off for the win, you needed to have your story delivered as soon as that game ended. So there was no messing around. You were as locked in as the players on your work because it had to get done. But afterwards there's like a mental sort of exhaustion you get the next day. And I just remember traveling to Tampa the next day and just being in a complete daze and barely having any energy at all. And by the time first pitch of Game 6 rolls around, you get the energy back just from the adrenaline. But it's like magic. It kicks in right when the game starts. You're kind of dead until then. So these games, they're adrenaline filled. And I've been through it a few times with, most playoffs are like this, but especially 03 was like that. 04 was like that. 07, not as much, except, the Game 5 in Cleveland, but Game 6 and 7, they sort of, kind of tooled off on Cleveland in those two games. But then, certainly 2008 was like that, and 2013 was like that. That was another crazy one. That the ALCS against the Tigers, even that World Series against the Cardinals was better than people remember. Red Sox were actually down 2-1 after Game 3. And 2018 was just different altogether because that was the one team I covered where I thought was just a machine. They were just 11-3 in the postseason. And just they could beat you anyway. So that was different altogether. But yeah, all these postseasons we've gotten to cover have been pretty spend. The one you said in 21, that's underrated too. That was a great postseason that you thought they were going to. That was a little bit like you said, like 2008. You thought they were going to the World Series that year too, because they, they lost Game 1 of the ALCS in Houston, and then the offense just goes on this rampage the next 2 days. And Kyle Schwarber hits a grand slam at Fenway in Game 3, and the Red Sox are blowing the Rays out 2 games in a row, and they have Zach Greinke, who seems washed up, going in Game 4, and you think they're going to go up 3-1, and they go to the World Series against this upstart Braves team. So that was kind of another series that got away from the Red Sox. So some of these, you come back in so many of these, but there's also some that just kind of like 2008 and 2021, 2003. There's also some that got away from you that you very easily could have won also.
The last thing I have for you, and this has been a fantastic conversation about this game, is when you look back, obviously Garza, like you mentioned, was great in Game 7. And this is probably more from the Rays perspective, but it was great in Game 7. He won 2 games, one in Game 3 at Fenway as well. Did they get it right with the 2008 ALCS MVP? Should it have been Garza, or do you think that BJ Upton may have gotten robbed given? Put it this way: if the series ends after 5, or this is the thing, like the Red Sox extended this series. Did the Red Sox extending this series cost BJ Upton MVP honors in the series?
For sure, yeah. Because Garza doesn't win MVP without Game 7, but I can see, because I think Garza pitched well at Game 3 also, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember what his exact line was, but yeah, I think that 2 really good starts. At that point, you can say that kind of swung the series, and I don't think Upton really did much in Game 6 and 7, right? So I think it was fair. I think they actually did get it right, and yeah, if the Rays win it, you're right. If the Rays win in 5, it's BJ Upton MVP. Rays win in 7. Offense cools down in the last 2 games. Garza kind of carries them to the finish line in Game 7. So yeah, I think they got it right.
Always great to talk with the people that were there to cover this one, and obviously a crazy game in Red Sox history. Ian, we thank you for your time, and best of luck continuing the 26th season as well. Still early on, but a big weekend coming up for Marathon Weekend as well.
For sure. All right, Jim. Thanks, man.
Big thanks to those contributions and so many great stories with Ian as we go throughout the 2008 ALCS Game 5 Can't Miss Classic here on the Tim Crowley Show. Got so many great details about the 2008 team for the Red Sox that obviously fell a game short in Game 7, but what a Game 5 this was. In one of the better playoff games we've seen at Fenway Park in a non-championship setting, in the sense of a non-World Series year, which we'll have more on in just a moment. I always like to do studs and duds. This has been a big part of careers, my writing history, and a lot of kind of what drives media now. Everybody kind of calls it something different. The 3 players I thought that really made a difference in this game, let's dive into them. The studs that I would say, BJ Upton was phenomenal again, drove in 4 runs, and just, again, could not be stopped. He wanted the series to end in 5. He was ready to do it himself, but obviously the Red Sox came back in crazy fashion. Mark Kotze, I think, is an incredibly underappreciated part of this game. Again, scores the tying run, had a really big defensive play early in the game for a game that the Red Sox gave up a lot early. Every extra defensive play mattered, and every ability to prevent a run mattered. Kotze was a big part of that, a couple hits. And then J.D. Drew. I think for what he meant to the Red Sox, and again, it's a very complicated history because there was injuries and there was, underperformances for what was a pretty big contract at the time for him going into 2007. A 5-year deal for $70 million kind of came in an interesting offseason with Daisuke and Julio Lugo as the Red Sox put together that championship team in 2007. But JD Drew really had to find a way to step up in the absence that Ian talked about of David Ortiz for a lot of that year. I just think for JD, what you look at in a very complicated history, look how many big hits he had when it really mattered for the Red Sox in some form or another. 2007 against Fausto Carmona in Game 6. I believe he changed the name a couple times, right, in Fausto. But has the big home run in the midst of that 3-1 comeback. Game 6, he hits the grand slam in the first inning of a big win for the Red Sox. In 2008, he's the All-Star Game MVP. He hits a game-tying home run at Yankee Stadium in the last All-Star Game at the old Yankee Stadium. That was a big hit. And then the 2 in back-to-back innings. The 2-run home run off Dan Wheeler, the hit off J.P. Howell to win it. This was an incredible game for J.D. Drew. And it's probably the most important one in a Red Sox uniform for him in the course of a few really competitive years in Boston. So those are the studs. The duds, I always try to do 3 and 3 because it just makes sense. You could group the Tampa bullpen into one. You were handed a 7-0 lead and were 7 outs away from the World Series in Game 5. Obviously, they got there a few days later, but they had a chance to lock this down. The Red Sox had no momentum, absolutely none. Like we talked about, to that point in the 7th inning, the Red Sox were being outscored, I believe it was 29-7 in the series to that point. We can double check that as well. Sorry, it was so you know what it was? So after that, so it was 7-0 Rays, bottom 7. To that point in the series, the Red Sox have been outscored in the last couple in the games at Fenway Park in the 7th inning of Game 5 to that point. The Red Sox have been outscored 29-5. That's insane. So for this Tampa bullpen, and I'm going to put more of this on Dan Wheeler and Grant Balfour. Obviously, Howell's in a tough situation, tied game of the night. There's no excuse for that type of lockdown again. A team that had been battered like that on its home field. And this was mentioned in the TBS broadcast as well. The Red Sox were back up against the wall, against elimination, but they had never lost 3 consecutive home games in a series in a postseason ever. And the Rays clearly had a lane to do that. Again, we're 7 outs away from doing that before utter chaos ensued in positive fashion for the Red Sox. And I'm going to throw a dud to Daisuke as well. Like we talked about, really good year on paper for him. It was a sub-3 ERA, 18 wins, but again, he liked to play Houdini. There was a lot of traffic on the mound, and that was one of the starts that came back to bite him against what was a really good Rays lineup that year. But the Red Sox were obviously ultimately able to overcome it and created a classic in Game 5. Final takeaways I want to give on this game, and thanks so much for tuning in and coming down this trip through memory lane for a game that I'm sure a lot of veteran Red Sox fans and kind of a generation that grew up in the 2000s probably remembers but isn't going to always come back to when you think of all the other championship teams. I wanted to leave with 3 takeaways, and we'll start on that category. Take out World Series years. That's both wins and appearances. From a non-World Series year, I think this has the argument to be the best playoff game that's been played at Fenway Park in any of those non-championship years. What it meant at the time to start what was a near comeback in the ALCS for the 3rd time in 4 or 5 years at that point. The crowd at Fenway was great as the comeback went on, doing it against a division rival who was kind of new on the scene and obviously had a history with during the year. There are other contenders, obviously, if I say this to Fenway Park, it stays there. But it could honestly go across the board to some of the other ones as well, because I think the competition for this game to earn that title of best Red Sox playoff game from a non-World Series year, it's probably like 1999 in Cleveland when Pedro comes out of the bullpen and Troy O'Leary has a couple home runs. The 2021 playoff run also against Tampa, Game 3 or 4 you could pick as well. But it's a recency bias. They were great. The 99 game was great. Maybe there's an angle there to win that argument with Pedro coming out of the pen and being so dominant after a weird start to that series and being obviously unbelievable in 1999 as well. I just think for this game, what it meant in the potential of keeping it what could have been a dynasty alive. And maybe you can still call the Red Sox that in the 2000s. It was 2 and 4 years. It kept the dream of 3 and 5 alive for a few more days in the sense of getting to Game 6, and then they were so close in Game 7. Just couldn't do enough offensively against Matt Garza. What this game meant, the style of the comeback, the timing for the Red Sox of great dominance of this time, and then doing it against a division rival, I'm going to put my chest out, and I will say I think this is the best Red Sox playoff game from a non-World Series year, and I do stand by that. Second takeaway, B.J. Upke got totally robbed in this series, by the way, too, because if the Rays close this out in 5 or even 6, he walks away with MVP honors. Hit .321 in the series, hit 4 home runs, drove in 11, was just on an absolute tear, OPS well over 1,000 as well. This isn't to take away from Matt Garza, because he was really, really good. Only gave up 2 earned runs in the series. I think he pitched 13-plus innings. Earned, right, especially doing so in a big spot like he did in Game 7 and really rose to the occasion after we didn't know how that start was going to go. Gives up the home run to Dustin Pedroia on the second pitch of the game, or the second batter of the game. The Red Sox take an early lead. But he bared down from there, and it was absolutely awesome. 9 strikeouts in Game 7. So this is not to take away from Garza, because he turned in 2 really good starts and 2 wins for the Rays that series. I just think with the tear that B.J. Upton went on, and maybe this gets a little spanning across the postseason, because he was good against Chicago, he was good in the World Series against the Phillies, or at least had some big moments in that series. He could not be stopped at Fenway Park, and had some big hits at the Trop as well. This is nothing against Matt Garza, but you look at the numbers and what B.J. Upton meant to spark that lineup and set the tone for everybody else, because Longoria and Pena also had big moments in that series as well. But B.J. Upton was an extra sort of spark. He was the catalyst for that Rays offense that October, especially those 3 games at Fenway. I thought it was enough to win him 2008 ALCS MVP. That's nothing against Garza, but I think B.J. Upton got robbed. Final takeaway, and we alluded to this a little bit in game notes. I think that this series, cultivated in this incredible Game 5, was the last great run for MLB on TBS. And that's weird to say, knowing that they're still broadcasting playoff games all the way years later in 2026. But what the feel was, it was the great music, little transitions going to break. I think Love This Town by Bon Jovi was kind of like the postseason theme song for them that year. The commercials were great. The score bug from that playoff series against Tampa for the Red Sox, it's one of my favorites ever, just because it's good color. It's not totally in the way. It's still a good size. It just looked really good. I thought from a presentation standpoint, where I think TBS has kind of fallen off the last few years, it looked great. Chip Carey was, really good at bringing the energy during series like that. And one across 7 games where the Red Sox and Rays just went back and forth at times. I thought he did a great job. This is the style of MLB on TBS that I miss all these years later. And I wish we got to see that style of production one more time. But that's why we have these games to go back and talk about, because this truly was the golden era of the MLB on TBS. That'll do it for this episode of Can't Miss Classics. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you didn't always think about this game back in 2008, I hope you kind of get a greater appreciation for it now, especially the Red Sox fans watching and understanding what this game meant, even if it wasn't a year that ended with a World Series title. Plenty of more of these on the way. We'll probably dive into the football realm at some point as well, too. But plenty more coming in these great dives that we'll get to take on Can't Miss Classics. I'm Tim Crowley. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.